King Prose Tao, the waves of life is like the sea. When it is calm, it is vast, without purpose and at a loss. But suddenly the waves rise, roaring and unstoppable. Those behind push those in front, and those in front push those ahead. The general trend is the trend, and you can't help but follow the trend. Roll over. After a while, the wind stopped and the waves calmed down. What was left was still a vast, tired, lazy place, with a wave of memories. I entered middle school when I was 12 years old. It was just before a storm and the air was very dull. The middle school I went to was not a so-called ordinary middle school, but a prefectural girls' normal school. It was the only place in the county where girls at middle school level could study, because at that time there was no such thing as male and female classmates, and they had never even dreamed of it. The women's normal school is located in the middle of Yuhu Lake. The school building occupies a piece of land with beautiful scenery called Juzhou. There are many historical sites in Juzhou. It is said that very early in the kingly period of the Northern Song dynasty, Mr. Liu Shihuyu gave lectures here. However, it was not called Juzhou at that time, but Songdao. In the Shiqing period of the Southern Song dynasty, Shi Zhongdinggong Hao built Zhenyan Pavilion on the site and changed Songdao into Bamboo Island. Later, Mr. Shen Shuhui-Huan and his younger brother Bing came and lived on the right side of Zhenyan Hall. They each opened lecture halls and gave lectures, which was very lively. Later, there were more famous people from generation to generation, such as Liu Yixi and Qi built Jingxi Hall, Quan Zishan Zhuang wrote books in Shuangju Shanfeng, and Fei Zuoji Yizhu lectured on the essence of debate. These are things people in Siming talk about, and our principal, Mr. Shi Lao, talks about them endlessly. Mr. Shi was a scholar in the Qing dynasty and an old friend of my grandfather. He has a face like a full moon, with a red light, and 3 towers of teeth and beards. He may not be long, but he is not short either. While talking, he always touched his whiskers with his hands, gently, slowly, for fear of accidentally touching one. It is not a joke. It would be more sad than breaking his pair of white glass glasses. I heard that the glass of his glasses was only broken once in his life. That was in the first half of the year I entered this school. It is said that a senior girl joined the Kuomintang and invited 3 or 5 classmates to talk about gender equality and free love on the playground early in the morning. Yes, my 5th aunt, the house mistress of the normal school, heard it and ran to the principal's office with her little feet wearing leather shoes like drums. At that time, Mr. Shi had just sat down to drink tea. He was touching his teeth with one hand and was taking off his glasses to wipe them with the other hand. The heat of the tea rushed up and blurred the glass of his glasses. The 5th aunt came in panting and said these words intermittently. Mr. Shi, when I heard the word Kuomintang, my hands trembled. Fortunately, my teeth were not broken, but my glasses fell to the ground. Although my 5th aunt hurriedly bent down to pick them up, she couldn't help but feel sorry for them. They were white and thin. A piece of glass was broken. It was not enough to break the glass. Gradually, Mr. Shi's heart was also broken, because later on, although this girl who joined the Kuomintang was forced to voluntarily drop out of school, it seemed that a trend had developed among senior girls. They often talked privately about the situation in the playground, on campus, or in the toilet, which made my 5th aunt angry. His little feet were running round in leather shoes and kept busy. Mr. Shi often touched his teeth and sighed softly. I entered the school, watched Qi Long grow up. When I asked someone by chance, they told me what had happened, and I suddenly realized it. But after enlightenment, I was a little confused. What is the Kuomintang? Why are those who join the Kuomintang ordered to drop out of school? When I asked my 5th aunt about this, she became greatly panicked. She blushed and warned me angrily. Listen, does your child's family know about the Kuomintang? Who told you? Fortunately, he didn't let his elder know about it. If his elder Mr. Shi got it, you have to be careful what you say. I was also panicked, and I really didn't dare to say a word. But before the afternoon, Mr. Shi came and asked me to go to the principal's office, where my 5th aunt was standing next to me. The 5th aunt's face was red, but Mr. Shi seemed to have absorbed all the red light and looked a little pale. His face seemed angry, but with a slight sadness. I stood in front of him, shook my head, and bowed. He nodded slightly, holding the teacup in his left hand, and began to touch his teeth with his right hand. He said a lot of things to me, and he quoted a lot of ancient books. One thing I couldn't understand, and the other thing was that I felt panicked. It took me a long time to catch on to the 4 words, "the jade stone will perish together," which probably meant that if I continued to mess around with them, if we go down, we will all be destroyed in the future. But in fact, I never messed around with them. I just asked how the 5th aunt reported to him. I wanted to explain, but he had already waved me out. This was the first time I had the opportunity to talk to him after entering the women's normal college. No, I should say listen to his talk. The second time he called me into the principal's office because I shouldn't have braided my hair. It turns out that there was a rule in the girls' school at that time, which was that the girls in the elementary school should wear braids, and the girls in the normal school should wear their hair. It didn't matter their age, only their level. I entered middle school at the age of 12, and I was the youngest at the time. Many girls in the elementary school who were 18 or 19 or even in their 20s had long braids, but I had to form a body. There are many styles of combing hair, including straight S, horizontal S, and other kinds of hair, but I can't comb it. I can only imitate the most honest people and follow the example of honest and convenient pigtails. That is, tie a pigtail, put it up randomly, and use a few hairpins to clamp it. Sometimes while jumping and running, the silver hairpin falls on the ground, and the braid loses its shackles, twists and turns, and hangs down like water from a small hole. So someone suggested to me, "You are young, and it won't look good if you comb your hair alone in the future. It's better to comb 2 of them." I thought of the maids in the pictures of beauties in ancient costumes, and thought their undulations looked pretty good. So I did it. Unexpectedly, Mr. She called me over to reprimand him again. This time, his face was greener and whiter. His right hand was not touching his teeth, but holding them tightly. He said, "Why don't you abide by the school rules? Comb your hair twice." What is it like? As the old saying goes, on the second day of the Tianyuan period, the people have no masters. They are really rebelling. The 5th aunt stood aside, her face flushed, as if she was overwhelmed with excitement, but her limbs seemed cold and cold. I thought, what does combing your hair have to do with rebellion? It's really baffling how the braided heads can compare to the sun or the human master. When I was about to ask, as soon as I moved my lips, the 5th aunt scolded me. "Go out and comb your hair. Who told you to comb your hair for a policeman? Who is instigating you? Go out quickly. Comb your hair quickly." I changed my comb. I withdrew with tears in my eyes. From then on, my braided hair merged back into one, but the whole of China was still torn apart. The National Revolutionary Army set out from Guangdong and rushed all the way to Zhejiang province. In the bright spring of the next year, the comrades finally completed their bright and brilliant work. The entire county was filled with blue sky and white sun flags. There was only one missing place, and that was the women's normal school under the management of our Mr. Shi. A red flag with a corner of blue sky and white sun. The pattern is fresh. All institutions, schools, groups, and even fashionable families are rushing to make a brand new flag and hang it up, the higher the better, fluttering in the wind. It seems to be a universal greeting to young men and women from all over the world. So the young people looked up to it, with thousands of hearts floating upward together, and their voices became louder and louder. Down with imperialism, down with the local tyrants and evil gentry, women's emancipation, haircuts, and finally a requirement for male and female classmates, which really made Mr. Shi very angry. He resolutely refused to fly the national flag, saying that all evils were caused by it. Then the senior classmates started shouting, and Mr. Shi implemented a blockade policy and no one was allowed to leave the school. The day students were temporarily kept in the school, and the local boarding students were not allowed to go out even on weekends and holidays. However, the news finally got out. Round the school, on the walls, pillars, and shop windows, there were all plastered with slogans. Then, it is a cookie-cutter request to expel corrupt elements and old stubborns. We would not have seen these slogans originally, because they called Zhang Mata by peanuts. The candy shop was greedy and tore them off to wrap them in paper, so they could reach our eyes. Eradicate the corrupt elements. Down with the old stubbornness. The school also shouted, and all those who made a real demonstration for the first time had their hair cut off. I remember a senior classmate said to me, Su Qing, aren't you afraid of trouble? It's so ugly for such a young person to have a braided hair, like a little old woman. They don't even agree to do to braids. They are autocratic. Aren't you going to resist and seek liberation? So I nodded repeatedly, and she picked up the scissors and cut my hair to be liberated. When my fifth aunt came to check the dormitory at night, she was shocked when she saw that the table was covered with messy hair and scissors. She stood in the middle of the room and shouted, "Are you all asleep? Look! What is this? Where did all the hair on the table come from? Who was the student on duty?" Although she continued to ask a series of questions, no one answered. Everyone pretended to be asleep, and she became even more angry. She went to look at the name on the duty list. What a shame! It happened to be Su Qing. She opened my curtain and shouted, "Ah Qing, wake up soon. Don't you know you are a student on duty?" My head had already sunk into the thin quilt. When I heard what she said, I just chuckled under the quilt and replied, "I'm on day duty, but not night duty." The fifth aunt was stunned for a long time and suddenly pulled the quilt upright. When I uncovered it, my hair had already been removed all over my neck and forehead. When she opened the curtains of the beds and found that everyone had short, messy hair, she couldn't help but stumbled out and ran out, trembling and shouting, "It's reversed! It's reversed! It's reversed! I'm going to tell Mr. Shi. I must have free love." So I cut my hair. She looked like a crazy woman, and we all sat up on the bed and looked at her and laughed. Later, probably because of the distinction between men and women, she was too embarrassed to knock on Mr. Shi's bedroom door in the dark. She finally stayed in her room and walked around in circles, wearing leather shoes that made a loud noise. There was no sound. Early the next morning, when we were admiring our short hair in the mirror, the school janitor, Mr. Wang, rang the bell desperately and said that there was an urgent matter and there was a meeting. The auditorium was in chaos and some were disorderly. Mr. Shi stood on the podium, with 7 or 8 teachers standing on both sides, and below him a fifth aunt, with a pale face and dull eyes. Mr. Shi was wearing a gray long-sleeve shirt and a black mandarin jacket. He looked very calm, and his teeth seemed to be particularly neatly combed. He gently twisted one hand and pressed the desk with the other and said, "Classmates, please don't make any noise. Please maintain order." Suddenly the entire classroom fell into dead silence. I sat in the front row and felt a little panicked. I heard Mr. Shi slowly continue to say, "Brother, it has been 15 years since I came here. Many of my classmates are my family friends, such as Su Qingjin." He let go of the fingers that patted his teeth. Looking at me, my head dropped. She entered school in the same year as her grandfather, and her mother was also my student. Now I see her as if she is my little granddaughter. But alas, even people like my little granddaughter have betrayed me now? No, I should say deviated from the norm. I have been reading the books of sages since I was a child, and I have asked myself all my life that I have done nothing wrong. When he said this, he could only hear the laughter from the audience, but for some reason, I just felt sad and secretly swallowed tears. He went on to say, "Don't laugh. I am a die-hard. I would rather be a die-hard than blindly follow the frivolous boys and talk about free love. Well, I can't say such foul language. It's really a world of animals. That's it. If you are a girl, you should get married, and it must be ordered by your parents. Now that you have cut your hair, what will you do with the beads and flowers when you return? We will never wear beaded flowers. We will never moan." The audience started to get confused again. Mr. Shi said even more solemnly and calmly, "No, you must wear beaded flowers. Women always love beauty. Even if you don't wear beaded flowers, you have to wear something else. You will definitely regret it in the future and grow your hair again. No, never. We don't want to listen. It's okay if you don't want to listen." Mr. Shi's voice began to sound hoarse. "I won't tell you anymore. I'm here to say goodbye to you today. My resignation letter has been submitted to the Education Bureau. They will send someone to pick it up, and you will probably have a brand new flag tomorrow morning. Actually, I know they can only give you a flag, and they can also cut your hair. This is the so-called revolution. You are too young to be taken advantage of by others. You will be ruined. Take a break from school in the afternoon and go home with your fifth aunt, without waiting for my consent." My fifth aunt hired a rowing boat to take me home after lunch. I finally lost sight of the newly made blue sky and white sun and the red national flag on the ground. Although my hair was said to have been liberated, living at home was really lonely. The fifth aunt often nags to my grandfather, saying that the world has changed and girls have become bad. They cut off their hair and look like duck butts. But my grandfather disagreed, saying that it was too troublesome to comb my hair, so it would be better to remove the braids. He even agrees with equality between men and women, and also with women serving society. But there is one thing that he can't understand, but he absolutely cannot agree with, and that is the so-called free love. My brother came back from the city during the summer vacation and told me that Mr. She had left early and that the women's normal college would be transformed into a Sun Yat-sen public school and would have co-educational classes. Grandfather said that it doesn't matter if you are male or female classmates. Everyone can learn from each other. But when boys and girls get together, it's better not to cause any trouble. My brother said, "What does it matter if we just have sex?" Many people are in favor of free love now. After hearing this, my grandfather became furious and said, "What is free love? That is simply fornication. Female dogs are just like male dogs." The fifth aunt sat beside me and called me tremblingly. "Why don't you go out to see your mother? What are you standing here listening to?" I pouted and went out, even if I didn't listen. Anyway, my brother had secretly given me many books about the Three People's Principles. I could read them quietly when I had nothing to do. Inside the book, there is also a party song and score cut from a newspaper, and a mimeographed will of the Prime Minister. I love singing and begged my brother to teach me how to sing party songs. But he couldn't. I had no choice but to gently press the score and humming over and over again. I actually sounded in tune. As for the Prime Minister's will, it is a treasure book that I have studied, word for word, over and over again. And I have become familiar with it after reading it again and again. After the summer vacation, my brother went to Sun Yat-sen public school, and I was forced to stay at home. According to my grandfather, as long as the male and female students don't make too much noise, I will be allowed to go back to school next semester. Otherwise, I should stay at home and help my mother with some things. I don't like helping my mother, like my fifth aunt, who said she was helping my grandmother cook, but she wanted to cook beef curry. There was no place to buy curry powder in the countryside, so she asked me to ask the owner of the Shenda grocery store. The owner said, "Don't be happy, little girl. You have to go to the sea to fish for clams. How can you buy it in a small store?" My fifth aunt couldn't cook new dishes, so she made snacks out of spite. Her masterpiece was banana pudding. There was plenty of oysters and wheat flour in the countryside, but there was a lack of banana oil and other things. So my fifth aunt sighed, and my grandfather sighed with her. The reason why my grandfather sighed was not because he couldn't eat beef curry or any pudding, but because he often received letters from my brother from school recently, saying that most teachers in the school believed in communism and were arguing about divorcing their wives with bound feet at home every day. As for the general young students, they talked about Marx and Borodin all the time, and sat shoulder to shoulder with the girls in class to talk about gay love. Therefore, although the school implemented a no-roll call system, they would never be absent. Sometimes there was also a phenomenon of fighting for seats. That is, there were too few girls, and many students could not sit at the same table with other girls. So they complained that the seating arrangement of the guidance office was unfair, and asked for a lottery to decide, or simply adopt a rotation system, changing seats once a week. My grandfather always sighed after reading the letter, and only after sighing did he remember the various magazines that were sent with it. Magazines were often ranged horizontally, and my grandfather found it difficult to read. So he put on and took off a pair of reading glasses, took them off and put them on again, and was busy all the time. My fifth aunt said, "Old man, you should take a break. What's the point of this heresy?" My grandfather said that the theories of the Kuomintang and the Communist Party were not bad, but they had problems in practice. If male and female students could not be strictly controlled and not even allowed to look at each other, it would be better to postpone it for a few years until these young people were older. Although the above words were my grandfather's personal opinions, and I did not recommend them to the authorities, the wise authorities shared the same views as my grandfather after all, and disbanded Zhongshan Public School in less than 3 months. I heard that the reason for the disbandment was not entirely to clarify the relationship between men and women. Some of them had political backgrounds, which was called party purge. My brother came home and told me the information before the school was disbanded. He said, "It's really interesting. At first, it was to overthrow the local tyrants and evil gentry, overthrow the city gods, and the students set out in groups, showing off their power. Later, the right to show off their power was somehow given to the soldiers. Groups of armed comrades rushed to the school, guarded the front and back of the school gate, and first picked an open space to fire guns for demonstration. Then they searched for communist elements. Girls with red scarves were to be arrested, and those named Zhang Jianqi were also to be arrested. Those who painted the party flag crookedly, or those who had corresponded with those who painted the party flag crookedly, had shared dormitories, and had written in the yearbook were to be arrested. After some people were arrested, as long as their fathers had acquaintances working in the party department or had contacts with some agencies, they could be bailed out. Some were tortured and then sent to Hangzhou and Nanjing. It is said that there was a very beautiful elementary school teacher in a neighboring county. A party member failed to pursue her, so he gave the suspected communists to the people who were going to catch her and stuffed her into her small net basket. In this way, he took her to the headquarters for interrogation. After the interrogation, she was imprisoned in prison, so the party member tried to please her again and proposed to her, saying that as long as she was willing, he could clear her name. Unfortunately, the female teacher was too young, too pure, and too good at lying. She said that she really couldn't love him and scolded him for having no personality. He was so ashamed that he got angry, and as a result, the female teacher was shot. She was very beautiful when she died. People who watched the execution admired her lotus-like jade arms and couldn't bear to leave. The party member also shed tears. It is said that the beautiful female teacher finally died unjustly. My brother said that China lost a revolutionary female comrade. My fifth aunt snorted and said, "How can a beautiful woman be revolutionary? It was completely her free love that ruined her. And the party members were not to blame." Grandfather said nothing. Looking up at the sky, I also followed his gaze, as if I saw an innocent girl, waving her lotus root-like arms and crying, "It's unfair." I died so bitterly. After the new year, the school that was changed from a women's normal school to Zhongshan Public School was finally changed from Zhongshan Public School to a women's middle school. The principal was a beautiful woman named Zhu, who had just divorced her husband. She had only completed 1 year of college courses and studied in the women's normal school. She had a teacher-student relationship with my fifth aunt. She wrote to invite my fifth aunt to be the director of guidance. My fifth aunt was very happy and forgot the sin of her free love. It was said that Principal Zhu was in love with a party member named Shang at that time. Mr. Shang taught political training at the girls' school. I clamored to go back to school. Grandfather hesitated for a while and finally agreed, only asking my fifth aunt to discipline me strictly. When I arrived at the school, I saw that everything was almost the same, except that the party flag was brand new and the school building had been painted. It was said that in the days of Sun Yat-sen Public School, male students were all scribbling on the walls, and they liked to write slogans everywhere, such as "Down with the rotten bitch XXX." Oppose handing in love letters in class. "Sister, I love your thighs." Everywhere, especially by the toilet door. After the painting, although some places were still roughly visible, everyone was careless. Fortunately, male students had disappeared, and the doorman and the cook were always servants. How could a toad dare to eat swan meat? The delicate female students would never pay attention to them. But what is worth considering is the male teachers. The old teachers have all followed Mr. Shi. Although Principal Zhu repeatedly urged them, they were unwilling to be inferior to a young woman. There was no choice but to invite young people who were about the same age as Mr. Shang. There was a Chinese teacher named Huang, who often wore a gray gown, combed his hair, but his face was long like a horse's face, with small eyes, swaying when he walked. And Bingshan was always mentioned in his conversation. He often sighed in the classroom. "Oh, the sea, my mother." The naughty students responded with "here," but their faces immediately turned red. Once he taught Moses universal love. While explaining, he shook his head and said, "This kind of ancient prose is very boring. In fact, There is no need to read it. Only Bingshin's prose is really quiet, beautiful, gentle, and affectionate. Alas, teacher, what exactly is universal love? I stared at the long horse-like face and asked impatiently. He quickly answered, universal love means you love me, and I love you. All the students in the classroom laughed. He didn't understand, but I did. Later, when the students saw me, they teased me. Here comes Mr. Huang who talked about universal love with you. He often praised me, saying that my articles were like Bingshin's. Some classmates asked, who is better, Bingshin or Su Qing? He squinted his small eyes and said, now it's Bingshin. Maybe in the future it's Su Qing. The classmates laughed, but I didn't. Looking at his long horse-like face, I was just angry. It turned out that there was a trend among girls at that time. That is, they liked to pursue male teachers. There was an English teacher named Zhang, who was not very pretty, with hair parted in the middle, wearing myopic glasses, and often wearing a light brown suit. We all called him Red Mouse. Every time before he started class, the atmosphere in the classroom was different, and I just felt empty and calm. I thought, where did the classmates go? Later, I found out by chance that they were all changing socks and applying powder in the dormitory. It was really pitiful. All female high school students had to wear black leather shoes in school uniforms, so the only way to achieve a surprise was to wear a pair of stockings. There were light gray, pure black, or pure white, and coffee color, but most of them were pink. When Mr. Zheng walked into the classroom, some girls deliberately stretched their feet out beside their seats, so when they bowed, they did not stand at attention but at ease. Some people also bent irregularly, swaying like willows, as if they were dancing. For Mr. Zheng, our female high school classmates actually read English while shouting down with imperialism. They often read a lesson over and over again, and read it very softly and clearly, so the whole classroom was like a bridge of crackling, which made Mr. Zheng very happy. He kept saying, tomorrow I will teach you to perform an English play about Columbus discovering the New World, Columbus. As a result, when the roles in the play were assigned, the one who was assigned to play Columbus was not liked. The one who was smug but pretended to be shy was a certain lady who played the Spanish queen and spoke less than 3 or 5 lines. As for Mr. Qing, although he was also quite young and beautiful, the students did not dare to mess with him because he was the favorite of Principal Zhu. For the sake of loving Principal Zhu, he did not hesitate to divorce his country wife. When the agreement failed, he took the case to court. One of the reasons for the divorce was that she was unfilial to her parents-in-law and cursed chickens and dogs. The judge asked the parents-in-law whether your daughter-in-law was like this. Mr. Nan's father replied, my daughter-in-law is virtuous and filial, but my son was bewitched by the bitch, so he said hot words. In the end, the divorce failed, but Mr. Nan still lived with Principal Zhu. He taught us political training and often asked about current affairs. Once he asked me an international question, and I couldn't answer it. He was slightly angry and said, don't you read newspapers on weekdays? I said, yes. He said, then what do you read? I paused, then smiled and replied, it's because the request for divorce was denied. He was furious and said nothing. He puffed up his chest and looked very proud in his Zhongshan suit. I envied Principal Zhu a little, and I was also a little jealous of her. Really, we had a few opportunities to see men in school, but we had many opportunities to be seen. In all occasions where the public gathered, we were always called to sing party songs. At that time, most people could not sing party songs, so they had to ask the girls to select a dozen people to sing on their behalf. I was born short, so I stood in the front row and sang with a shrill voice. After singing, the chairman read his will. When some of the chairmen couldn't read it, or read it again, I was so anxious for him that I wished I could recite it for him. Sometimes there were entertainment after the meeting. The boys' school would perform plays, boxing, or do some chemical tricks, while the girls' school would definitely take on the most popular program, which was dancing. I remember that the plays that were often performed at that time were nothing more than The Rose of Resurrection, Return to the South, Flying Birds to the Southeast, Three Rebellious Women, A Night in a Coffee Shop, The Sorrow of Youth, etc. And the dances were mostly Three Butterflies, Poseidon Dance, Falling Flowers and Flowing Water, etc. Those students who could dance usually regarded themselves as beauties and acted gentle. The school uniforms were made very small and tightly wrapped around the body, and the skirts were very short, hanging about 2 or 3 inches above the knees, only covering the buttocks, which made my fifth aunt frown and glare, and she wanted to tear it off. But she didn't tear it off, because after pulling it off, although it covered the knees, it couldn't cover the buttocks. How could it be? Soon, the gin incident happened, so we stopped dancing and went out to investigate certain goods. We couldn't tell the difference between domestic goods and certain goods, so we only picked the beautiful ones and put seals on them, which made the merchants complain bitterly. We went out to investigate, led by the student union, which followed the guidance of the party and sometimes cooperated. Mr. Shang met with us almost every day. Soon he finally fell in love with a girl who was traveling with us, named Zhang Jianying. He wrote to her and said, "Mr. Ziying, why haven't you replied yet? I'm really looking forward to it. People say that they are looking forward to it, but I am looking forward to it too much." The letter finally fell into the hands of my fifth aunt, who trembled and handed it to the neighboring principal, and Principal Zhu said nothing. The next day, Principal Zhu angrily reported to us at the Memorial Week, "Mr. Shang is too busy with investigation work, so now Mr. He will teach political training. Please listen carefully," and so on. But a few days later, Mr. Zhu reported to us at the Memorial Week, "I have resigned from the Education Bureau because of my poor health recently. The new principal is Liu, please come." It is said that the reason for her resignation was because Mr. Nan had made trouble with her. The first good policy of Principal Liu was to keep my fifth aunt. He was an old teacher at the women's normal school. He was short and fat, with white pockmarks and two front teeth sticking out. He was probably in his 40s and had a serious attitude, which made people dare not be presumptuous when they saw him. Because of fear, students often called him Liu Ma behind his back. Moreover, because of his protruding abdomen and his swaggering walk, some people jokingly called him 10 months of pregnancy. But girls were tender-faced after all, and it was embarrassing to mention the words related to childbirth. So this nickname was far less loud and common than the former. Let's talk about Principal Liu, who taught mathematics in my class. Since the fall semester of the 17th year of the Republic of China, he taught less than 10 pages of the 5th volume of junior high school mixed mathematics written by Duan Yuan. The reason was that he would give a lecture as soon as he entered the class, and his lecture was nothing more than not being used by communists. The situation when he came to class was like this. First, before the bell rang, he walked in with a bulging belly, so we ran and jumped to find seats in a mess, and he just stood quietly on the podium with his eyes blazing. When we all stood still, he bowed respectfully. If someone ignored him, he would stare at her with his eyes, but did not call out her name, and said to the whole class, "This time it doesn't count, bow again." So those who ignored him had to stand up embarrassedly. After bowing to his satisfaction, he picked up the math book and pretended to turn the pages. Then his classmates also busied themselves turning the pages. Some of them didn't know which page they were on and just looked at him. He suddenly smiled, looked for the book and said, "Wait a minute, I still have a lecture." Then he went on, "First, it is inevitable that girls should get married when they grow up. If any of your classmates has a fiancé, don't follow them to see." Once I saw a classmate's fiancé coming to see her, he said. Turning his eyes to Liu Yuxiang's face immediately turned red, not only because of shyness, but also because of anger. So I explained for her, "That's not her fiancé, but a friend." Unexpectedly, Principal Liu suddenly frowned and said, "If it's not her fiancé, please ask him to come here less often in the future. If you want to make friends and exchange knowledge, there are many girlfriends here, as well as teachers. Why do you have to look for men outside?" Liu Yuxiang's face almost turned purple, and he slowly changed the topic. "In short, this matter is not good, and we must correct it in the future. Second, since the student union has been changed to the Student Self-Government Association, the scope should be reduced. Although the order of the student union should be accepted, it is enough to send a few representatives to perfunctorily handle the situation in similar places. There is no need for all of them to attend and show off in public, and let others criticize them for nothing." So the meeting was held, the will was read, speeches were made, slogans were shouted, and finally it was the turn of the lantern parade. First came the representatives of the party, the representatives of the organs, the orphanage music band, the representatives of various mass organizations, and finally the thousands of students. The order was the Provincial Middle School first, followed by the County Technical School and the Commercial School. Our girls' school was also a county school, so it should have been the next one, but the leaders, Mr. Ma, were shy and kept moving forward, causing several church middle schools to rush forward without any hesitation. Other private middle schools were not willing to lag behind, and we finally became the last one. Fortunately, there were still a few representatives of the Women's Association who did not want to mix with other men's groups and sincerely came to us to join the team. Of course, we let them go first and followed. The Grand Lantern Parade began. First, the team came out from the gate of the park, and the people who came to watch the fun had already gathered in a crowd. Those who marched were also in high spirits, talking and laughing, and some even pulled each other's ears. Later, the instructor thought it was too unbecoming, so he told everyone not to disturb the order and to sing a few songs with the band. So we sang the party song first, and then sang, "Down with the Imperialists! Down with the Imperialists! Get rid of the warlords! Get rid of the warlords! The National Revolution is successful! The National Revolution!" We walked to the gate of the garden while singing. "Ha, girls!" A chaotic voice rang out, and we were a little scared, but also felt inexplicably proud. However, the situation became more and more unbecoming. Men of unknown quality rushed into the team. Some twisted the legs of the fat female students, and some grinned and laughed, looking obscene and disgusting, which made us really anxious. Ouch! I'm going to die! My lantern is burning! Mr. Ma! Mr. Ma! Mr. Ma was so anxious that he was sweating all over his head, and he shouted, "Don't panic! Move forward! Move forward!" Finally, the front was informed, and a dozen policemen came from nowhere and shouted at the hooligans to beat them. Only then did those who were deliberately trying to take advantage of the situation stop and leave. There was another commotion. The female students were afraid that the batons would hit the fish on the ground, so they shouted to be careful, and their voices were a little tearful. The police also pinched their throats and said, "Don't be afraid. How can I bear to touch you with my batons? Don't worry." Mr. Wu's face turned red, and he pulled Mr. Ma's sleeve tightly and whispered, "Run back to school quickly." The female students had no choice but to leave the team, carrying the lanterns that were crushed, burned, and even only had a bamboo pole left, and fled back to school dejectedly. Principal Liu is stubborn, but this society is really not open-minded. Since we disrupted the Lantern Festival and proved Principal Liu's foresight, the students were divided into two groups. One group believed that Principal Liu was old and had insight, so they admired him in their hearts, but were too embarrassed to say it out loud. The other group was people like me, who did not have any profound or correct insights, but just had an inexplicable unwillingness to accept the failure of this new thing. Look how smug Principal Liu looked. No, he was almost gloating. He pretended to be a parent with a serious and hypocritical face, and treated us as ignorant children, saying in a sad tone, "I also support gender equality, but you also hope that students are patriotic. But if we can't do it, we, the students, will be locked up in a stagnant pool like fish caught in a net." If anyone dares to hum a word of unwillingness, it means that he is born with a weak bone and likes to hold a lantern to find wild men to touch them. My fifth aunt would often turn up her nose and snort at me. "Ah, King, you are a person who is smart but refuses to use it properly." For example, Principal Liu said to me yesterday that he felt sorry for you. From now on, you should be calmer, work hard and be calmer. However, who knows what to study? Mr. Qing, the Chinese teacher, is a red-nosed scholar, dirty. He snotted a lot when he stood on the podium. He had no handkerchief to use, so he just rolled up the leftover handouts to wipe them, and stuffed the dirty papers in the drawer. Principal Liu taught mathematics part-time, and skipped all the difficult questions, saying that women can't be engineers. So why do they need to understand advanced mathematics? It's more important to listen to his lectures every day. We now have a new teacher, Mr. Zhang, who reads like he is eating bran. coarse and stiff, and is really hard to listen to. It is said that he specializes in grammar, and he memorizes every sentence, like a law or a formula, before the exam. Once the exam date was changed, everyone took a breath and forgot all the sentences. There is also a Mr. Zhao who teaches party doctrine. He is even more of a low-level role, because Principal Liu said that the big party members can't afford to hire him. And if they offend him accidentally, they can't afford it, so they just find a substitute. On the podium, he is just like a joke for us. When it comes to knowledge, he doesn't even know that the canal connects the north and the south, and east and the west. And he can't figure out the big ports in the east. So we told him not to read the strategy of building a country, but to tell us about it and make us laugh. Did Mr. Zhuo have a headphone with the son of Premier Sun's henchman? Or did he pawn his wallet to some provincial party committee member? He just smiled stupidly, shamelessly, and took the $1 an hour. But if he was late for 10 minutes, we would shout, "Deduct 18 cents, deduct 10 cents. He seemed to feel bad, so he had to beg us with a bitter face, "Be more sloppy next time. I'll give you a range for the quiz." But the last time, he came in drunk, and when he heard us shout "deduct 18 cents, he raised his eyebrows and smiled disdainfully. He talked about his oriental ports and canals, and we talked about ours. Soon, we changed people. Later, after I was expelled from school, I met him at a corner of the road. He sat proudly in the chartered car. The wheels were shiny, rolling and turning fast, and the bells in front were jingling. He was rich. Now I have to talk about why I was expelled from school. In the spring of the 18th year of the Republic of China, for some reason the school invited a Mr. Zhu. Mr. Zhu was only 27 or 28 years old, with a thin face, pale yellow skin, and platinum-rimmed glasses. He spoke in a low voice, but his manner was very calm, which made people respect him. He taught history, but he said that it was better to know less about ancient things, just to make the general situation of the society in the past clear, and the surnames and names of the emperors of each dynasty, who managed their mothers, and the beauties of the concubines. After that, he began to teach us the history of the past 100 years in a serious manner. He explained clearly the ignorant people, the heinous events, and the treaties that humiliated the country. He said that our country should strive for self-strengthening and the youth should strive for progress. Compromise and shrinking are not acceptable. Sometimes he was sobbing and crying that the students were eager to listen. They ignored the bell after the end of get out of class. I don't know when the bell rang again. He was still talking excitedly, and we were also listening excitedly, but Principal Liu walked in with a protruding belly. Don't pay attention to him. My eyes glanced at him and immediately shot back to Mr. Zhu's face, hoping that he would talk more and more. Let him go. Other students seemed to have noticed it, but they all asked that the history class be extended and mathematics be left alone. However, with a beak, Mr. Zhu also saw it, so he had to hastily end the discussion and left with the name list. Then Principal Liu stepped onto the podium with a smile, and as usual, he lectured the students on how to study, behave, and eat in a peaceful manner, and not to seek trouble, otherwise radicals would harm the society. Radicals. We knew who he was referring to, and we felt bad for Mr. Zhu, so we used words to oppose him, and our opinions showed our great respect for Mr. Zhu. His face became fierce, and the pockmarks were clearly visible, but he was still a well-educated person, and he refused to reveal his anger. He just spit his lower lip and twisted his mouth, as if he was smiling falsely, or grinning grimly. Now, let's talk about unequal polygons. He hurriedly picked up the chalk and drew on the blackboard. He drew hard, and the chalk snapped in two. It seemed that Principal Liu's anger had not yet completely subsided. After that, he would become suspicious when he encountered something unpleasant, thinking that Mr. Zhu was inciting and helping the students. Once, there was a lunch strike in the school. First, the cook was too good at taking advantage of the situation. The side dishes became worse and worse, and there were fewer and fewer of them. A small yellow croaker that looked like a dragon head was grilled, but there was not enough for each of the 7 people at the table to pick up a chopstick. Moreover, it was smelly, and the fish meat looked like a lump of powder. It was okay to not remove the roots of the spinach and mung bean sprouts, but they couldn't even remove the mud. It made our mouths full of breath. Sometimes we also came up with a solution. We put the leftover side dishes together and found another small insect. Of course, it was better to have a fly. 7 people knocked on their bowls with 7 chopsticks and shouted, "Catering committee, command C. There is a fly in the dish. Make up a bowl. Punish a bowl." People at the neighboring table also joined in to cheer. And in the end, the cook always endured the bad luck and made up a bowl. Later, after this method was used many times, the cook refused to admit it. He said that in the future, he would check each bowl of food before eating it, and change it if necessary, and he would not change it after eating 1 chopstick. We were not convinced, but Principal Liu thought it was reasonable, so everyone had to grumble in secret. Unexpectedly, one day when everyone was about to finish a bucket of porridge, someone suddenly picked up a dirty rag from the bottom of the bucket. The thick, burnt yellow dirty juice had been mixed into the porridge, so everyone pinched their throats to try to vomit, but they couldn't vomit out the unhygienic juice, and the mess in the canteen began. They knocked on the bowls, slapped the table, kicked the stools, and made a mess. The reason the cook insisted on was, "Who told you not to check it out in advance?" We said, "Who knew you would have such a bad intention?" We only paid attention to the dishes in the bowl, but we didn't expect the problem to turn to the bottom of the rice bucket. He wanted to ask Principal Liu to ask the cook to change another bucket of porridge to settle the matter, but we all refused and insisted that the cook be responsible for ensuring that we would not have stomach problems in the future. He also said that a rotten stomach is not a joke. Unexpectedly, Principal Liu suddenly remembered something on his mind. Mr. Alex had a gastric ulcer. It is said that when Mr. Zhu was in college, he provided for all the expenses because his lover was studying in middle school. He was also a poor child and had no extra money for the two of them to spend. He had to run around and do some small things to make up for it. He was not careful with his diet, so he gradually developed stomach problems. Later, he also had heart disease. He felt that his future might not be very promising. He went out to work before graduation after studying for 3 years in college, so that his lover could go to college and study at ease. Principal Liu didn't care about his illness before, but he was really sorry that he had never graduated. Who knew that because of our incident in the canteen during the slack season, there would be misunderstandings, as if his stomach problems were suspected of instigation and encouragement. It was my 5th aunt who tried to make fun of it. She wanted to show her worth and dedication. So she sneered and said to us, "I have heard that stomach problems are caused by sacrificing for women, but I have never heard that they are caused by eating porridge." So we were angry and didn't eat porridge. We all ran to the canteen and ran into the dormitory to pretend to be sick. Soon, the 5th aunt was ordered to lock the dormitory. We all stood in the corridor and the courtyard, gritting our teeth, and some even cried out in dismay, seeing that there was no end. Afternoon. The school servants, Old Wang and Wu Ma, were sent out in batches to the small candy store at the school gate to buy bread. At about 3:30 in the afternoon, Principal Liu paid for noodles for us to eat, and said that the cook would be punished to add a bowl of meat to each table tomorrow. But Mr. Zhu was so angry that he fell ill. Mr. Zhu lived alone in the school. When he fell ill, no teacher, including Principal Liu, went to see him, and no one took care of his diet. So we discussed and gathered a dozen classmates to go see him in batches. But the 5th aunt told Principal Liu what he said. Girls are not allowed to enter the male teacher's dormitory. Later, we gathered money to buy flowers and bread and biscuits, and asked the school servant Old Wang to deliver them. This should have been without suspicion, but Principal Liu found an excuse to punish Old Wang, and from then on, the old staff refused to take care of us. Later, Mr. Zhu was admitted to the hospital. We didn't know about it at first. It was more than a week later that we found out that it was true. Everyone asked for leave to go out and visit him. The reason was finally discovered by my 5th aunt. She and Principal Liu were very angry and told the guidance office not to allow students to ask for leave to leave the school on weekdays. On a certain Sunday, we simply gathered more than 100 people and ran to the hospital. Unexpectedly, my 5th aunt and several other teachers from the guidance office had already been waiting at the gate of the hospital. They said that the doctor had told them that Mr. Zhu had a serious heart disease and needed to rest. Principal Liu also said that so many girls were rushing to see a young male teacher to make news. We all gathered at the gate of the hospital. We are not afraid of being made news, as long as we can see Mr. Zhu once. I saw them discuss for a while. And finally my fifth aunt told us, in order to make Mr. Zhu recover quickly, we should not disturb him. Let us send two representatives from each level to talk about it. We returned to the school. Because it was Sunday, many classmates had left, and we couldn't convene a meeting. When the representatives were sent out on Monday, the guidance office insisted not to let them leave the school, saying that they would wait until next Sunday. And fortunately, I was selected as one of the representatives this time. Sometimes when my fifth aunt met us, she would say with contempt, "Mr. Zhu has a lover. He is in great pain this time. Principal Liu has sent a telegram to call her over. Why do you have to be so excited?" She also said, "Mr. Zhu seems to be silent on weekdays, but he is actually very good at cheating women. So there are so many female students supporting him." All kinds of unbearable words made us associate more. Finally, on a rainy morning, a note was posted on the school bulletin board saying that Mr. Zhu, a teacher of this school, passed away due to illness, so the history courses at all levels of junior high school will be submitted by Mr. Mo from now on. What a snotty old man. From now on, the desk drawer will be filled with dirty handouts. We don't want to always listen to the story of since Pang who created the world. The three emperors have determined the world. We want to know what people should do in this world, this society, this country, and this era. History is a mirror. We should reflect living people, not just ancient skeletons. In memory of Mr. Zhu, however, the school authorities did not allow it. The funeral was his lover's business. The principal only sent a pair of mourning couplets. His lover did not hang them up after receiving them, because she was not able to do any funeral or hold any funeral for him. She only bought a coffin and put the body in the hall. It was all of us who proposed to hold an interim student meeting. The principal also sent people to attend the meeting. He suggested that our student union should also send a pair of mourning couplets. Mr. Chang could write the sentences. I shouted at that time, "Bah, don't cry over the rat." I looked at the student union chairman. Later, many people stood up and cursed the school. The principal and chairman said that the meeting should be adjourned temporarily and discussed again another day. I said, "Forget it. The person is dead. There is no need to hold such a meeting." However, some people stood up and continued to discuss it. Finally, two resolutions were made. One is that all students should wear a velvet flower in their hair, and the other is that there will be no history class this semester. However, several gentlemen present said that the school could not agree to this. At that time, the chairman continued, "Since the guidance of several gentlemen says that it is not allowed, I think it is better to cancel the second resolution and petition the principal for the first one, which is to wear a white flower, to seek his approval." I said, "How can a resolution be cancelled arbitrarily? It is everyone's freedom to wear a white flower or not. Why should I petition the principal?" Many people agreed with my opinion, and the chairman said angrily, "Then please ask Su Qingjin to be the chairman. I am weak and I don't want to do it anymore." Tears flowed down my face when I said that. Everyone said noisily that Su Qing should be the chairman. Some people also sneered that someone who cried so much was not worthy of being the chairman. But of course I refused to go up. Several gentlemen present also said that the chairman's decision could not be changed. As a result, the meeting was dispersed invisibly. The next day, we all refused to attend class and continued to hold a meeting. Principal Liu insisted that class must be held first, and the chairman refused to convene the meeting due to illness, so the school became an invisible strike. At night, Principal Liu removed the few of us who were originally selected as representatives to visit Mr. Zhu, saying that if we obeyed the school rules and went to class first, the rest would naturally follow. We said, "We are not the ones who refused to go to class. Why do we have to go first now?" Principal Liu said, "You are not helping Mr. Zhu to stir up a trend. So why would they select you as representatives?" We said, "First, Mr. Zhu has never stirred up any trend, and second, we were selected as representatives to visit the sick, and we have no obligation to go to class first this time." In the end, Principal Liu used a threatening tone to speak to us, and we were unwilling to give in, so we left unhappily. When we walked out of the principal's office, we met the president of the student union. I said, "Have you recovered from your illness?" She came up to me and held my hand in a sincere manner, saying, "I think we should go to class for the time being. Otherwise we may have to sacrifice ourselves." Principal Liu asked me for a list of names, saying who was inciting the unrest. On Sunday morning, it was originally agreed that representatives from all levels would visit Mr. Zhu, but now Mr. Zhu has died, and only a notice on the notice board was left shaking. What was strange was that next to this notice, there was another notice with denser fonts posted, which was to expel us representatives. The charge of expulsion was inciting a strike, and it was also said that we were incited by someone. This instigator probably referred to Mr. Zhu, but unfortunately he no longer exists in this suspicious world. The trend continued and expanded, but the solution was to withdraw the notice and let another man named Wen teach history. We were expelled and dropped out of school. In fact, it was still a sacrifice for us. We were about to get a junior high school diploma, but we lost it in vain. The girl who was the chairman soon asked Principal Liu to be her godfather. When she graduated the next year, she ranked first again. I thought, when the waves are surging, people can't calm it down. When the water is dead and motionless, it's hard for people to stir up waves. Let everything be obedient and natural. The storm is coming. I am excited. When it passes, I am still at a loss and left on the lonely earth.
Alright, this part of the story ends here.
Want to know what happened next? Let's listen to the breakdown next time.